All right, we are live for our third portion of 4 for the evening, and our most popular is the classic movie screening. This is our 19th discussion of a classic, and tonight is going to be Grand Hotel from 1932. There you can see its opening titles behind me. And for those of you that are very concerned, I don't work for the Clippers, but for those of you that are very concerned, I've cleaned up most of the beer here from the previous segment. I got a little excited by something Davie said about Greenberg in the Indie Spotlight, but I've only got a little beer left. I don't know if it's going to make me through the whole evening.
I'm going to make you keep
going. You got to keep going with that.
I don't know, maybe
my co-host here. Shut up till I introduce you. First up, apparently not drunk, is Davie tonight. Dave Joseph from Charlotte, North Carolina. Davie, how are you in those headphones?
How's it working out? I mean, the headphones, I think, have eliminated all the problems.
Yeah, so, no problems on my part. And of course, my other co-host is Jay Money, who apparently has a little thing for Greta Garbo here, according to his little guy.
Does anyone not have a thing for Greta Garbo? Come on.
I mean, I don't have a thing for Greta Garbo.
How can you not have a thing for Greta Garbo? She is a classic beauty.
I don't know. I think. Let's just say I find other people in this movie more attractive.
You know what, JB?
And other people in the 30s were all attractive. And maybe at some point I'll reveal my all-time favorite.
I smell a top 5.
You smell top 5.
Too bad he can't hear this, but
yeah. It's probably being worked on right now as we're talking here.
I wonder if this is when we were supposed to vamp.
We could vamp right now. Davie, Joe, are you with me on this, on the Greta Garbo, or no?
No, yeah, she's a lovely lady.
All right, you're not with me. Fine,
He's
whatever.
Fine. So the trivia portion, if you remember, is the Grand Hotel is the only film ever to win the Best Picture Oscar, which it did. But it only had the one nomination. It was nominated just for Best Picture, and it won with 0 other nominations. 1 nomination, 1 win. The only time that ever happened, even though it was only the 4th year of the Oscars. It won. It was the 5th year of the Oscars. The winners before were Wings, Broadway Melody of 1929, All Quiet in the Western Front, which is a film that we talked about, and then Cimarron went after that, and then Grand Hotel. So it was the 5th winner ever, and the only one to win with just the 1 nomination. Other fun tidbits. It was the first of many films that MGM would do that would initially put together an all-star cast. Now, granted, Garbo is probably the only person that most of you have heard of, maybe Joan Crawford, earlier in her career. But the Barrymores were very, very famous at the time, and Wallace Beery as well. Wallace Beery would win an Oscar this same year for a different movie. So this concept of an all-star cast is only something MGM was doing, and also this is the first film to have a set that was completely 360 degrees. So that's a fun little tidbit. What do you guys have some thoughts on any of those little trivia bits?
I would say that the idea of the set being 360 degrees really paid off very well for them in this film. It was something that they used, I think, quite exceptionally. And also, I'll just echo that.
Opening thoughts a bit, but Davie, Joe, do you have any thoughts on the tidbits, or you don't care?
No, they're all very interesting. I don't want to say that I don't care, but I don't have any real thoughts either.
You don't care.
Wait.
Okay.
Did you just ask me for thoughts and then cut me down for giving you a
So anyway, for those of you who don't know, in Grand Hotel, I'm going to move on, guys. In Grand Hotel, MGM assembles an all-star cast for this film about the intertwining lives of several guests in a high-end hotel in Berlin in 1929 on the verge of a worldwide depression. Were both of you seeing this film for the first time?
Yes.
Yeah, I had never seen it before, no.
All right. So let's see who goes first. Jay Money, you get opening thoughts first.
What I would say is that it actually took me a little while to get into the pacing of this film and the just where it was going. But once it did kind of sink in, I really got into it. So I really appreciated that.
Cool. Davie, Joe.
Yeah, I thought that the way it set up the beginning of the movie with the telephone calls, I thought that was really interesting. And it kind of I think I'm going to catch some flack from you on this, but it reminded me of another classic that we did. It kind of reminded me a bit of Shampoo in the sense that it had all these different characters and it kind of mixes them up and they all kind of come together
What's very funny about that is I was going to say that about Greenberg in the Indie Spotlight, and we just ran out of time, and I just felt like there's a direct connection between Greenberg and Shampoo, mainly being the way they use Los Angeles, and I really wanted to talk about Greenberg and Los Angeles, but we just didn't get to. But yeah, I don't see that connection at all between Shampoo and Grand Hotel.
It's just like,
I mean, Shampoo had a very specific protagonist. I'm not so sure this did. If you want to connect it with any films since then, as Neil Simon certainly used this same idea a lot in many of his plays that became films, like Plaza Suite, Executive Suite, and California Suite, and London Suite. I think, yeah, it's 4 of them. No, Executive Suite isn't him. London Suite's him. But anyway, so...
let me just explain that real quick. In the beginning, you see all these people on the phone, and you kind of get their backstory and what's going on in their lives, and then the question is, how are we gonna mix this up and bring everyone together, and how are they gonna interact? And I kind of had the same question with Shampoo, and then it was just fun watching it all unfold.
Okay. Yeah, I don't. It seems like you had a similar experience the way it washed over you, but I mean thematically and structurally, I don't see that connection. So real quick, as you know, these films come up in our discussions because I screen them either in Los Angeles or New York as a part of my classic movie screening series. This was screened in Los Angeles on August 3rd of this year, and let me just summarize, if I could, some of the thoughts that people had during the screening. One thing is the performance style, which is a common thing. It was a major detractor for a lot of the viewers. It was not a detractor for me personally because I'm used to it. I'm used to the 1930s styles. But some of the actors were broader than others, with 1 or 2 notable exceptions. And there was some disagreement about those exceptions. I mean, everybody said there was 1 exception. Some people said there was 2, and we can talk about that in just a second. The other comment was that. For the most part, they were interested in it, like they were interested cerebrally, but they weren't emotionally engaged. And that could go back to the performance styles, but I mean, like, they had a hard time getting behind the drama. But I think there were some other reasons for that I wanted to get into. I, for one, like the film very much. The performance issues are not an issue for me at all. But I would say that there are some suspect story issues, and let's start there because it's direct relation to what. Davie Joe said is I feel like the opening sequence is clunky exposition. I feel like it's a bit of a cheat, and I had a negative reaction to that to start out the film, and maybe Jay Money did too because he said it took him a second to get into it, and I would agree with that assessment because watching it August 3rd was my first time, and like I had I didn't feel good about that opening. It felt forced.
Interesting. I don't think that was necessarily that wasn't really the negative thing for me. I think that set a tone for me that I was expecting to see throughout the film. That also maybe is one of the reasons I was not as enamored with some of the performances in the very beginning. Probably through the first act in general, I would say I was not really sure. I was not really connecting with the characters quite as much. I didn't really have a problem with the exposition. I just thought it was kind of a very specific kind of cinematic trick. The kind of thing we've seen otherwise, but I also, I understood it was probably early on to see that kind of thing in this kind of movie, being 32, I believe, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, so it's the kind of thing where I appreciate what was going on. To me, it set more of a comic tone than I think is actually in this movie, and there was a point where my impression of what that meant changed dramatically as this movie progressed, and that's when my opinion of the movie also changed dramatically, as I started to see a lot more of the complexity sort of drawn out from the characters that were in this. As the way that the movie itself kind of drew itself around them, to me, helped expose a lot more dimensionality to the characters than I think was given in the initial act. So initially, I was like,
I don't disagree with that, but I mean, like, I'm pretty much on board with all that. But to me, the example I point to that I think is the representative of that first act is that opening sequence, because it's just information, and really what we get into, if you do get into this movie, it's you're getting into the characters, and all of like the little, like phone calls are always tough expositionally to begin with because you're only hearing one side of the conversation, so the other person is giving you information from both sides of the conversation, and that's always just like as a writer is really weak, and that is not a technical issue that that is something avoidable in 1932. That is not something that is like, oh, it's from 1932. Like the performance styles has the excuse of being older. I don't think story-wise this does.
Two things about that. One thing is that obviously, I mean, this is a really well-known play apparently, and I can see why that would work on stage in a different way than it does on screen. But secondly, I also think that kind of set up the idea of having isolated stories that either intertwine or don't. I mean, I think that sort of set the stage for having these really distinct storylines that occasionally cross over and occasionally don't cross over in a way that made sense to me. I think that it was nice that you actually had physically isolated situations for each of these characters to explain something, even though they were actually theoretically right next to each other the whole time they were explaining it. There's a quality to that I kind of get. I'm not saying that it's not a weak excuse to have exposition, because yes, at this point, you wouldn't do that now, for instance. That's just a little bit too obvious.
But I mean, like, most films wouldn't do it then. I mean, like, I don't know. I mean, as we see these films, like, can you imagine a sequence like that in All Quiet on the Western Front, which came from 2 years earlier? I mean, like, that seemed a lot more mature in that regard.
This is true, although it's funny that you mentioned All Quiet on the Western Front, because numerous times throughout watching Grand Hotel, I was reminded of All Quiet on the Western Front. Certainly the way
certainly the sound quality will remind you, like image quality and things like that.
Actually, the camera work actually is what the thing reminded me of. But yeah.
How so? I mean, I don't have that as a note. So how so? Like,
I feel like there were a lot of continuous swooping shots with cranes that seemed to carry through different parts of scenery.
Well, that speaks to what you talked about earlier, and that I did want to talk about the set. I have that as one of my later notes, but you brought it up. But I mean, I almost feel like some of those camera shots were designed to show off the set, and why not? I mean, like, it was impressive.
Yeah. I will say that, JB, just to go back to what you just said, one of the scenes that really exemplified that for me was the first scene with Joan Crawford and John Barrymore. To me, that was a very flat.
They were on a railing, like on the third floor or something.
And as much as that's kind of a fun scene, to me it was like, this is exemplary of a certain style of a certain period. Didn't really necessarily make a lot of sense at the time, and that again set a tone for me that it didn't, that I was kind of like toned out from the beginning of the film.
That's the scene there, right?
Yeah, that's the scene there. One other side note about that scene that I thought was fascinating. That is like one of the smokiest scenes I've ever seen in.
Well, you're jumping my order here, but let's jump into this now.
Okay.
Something you need to know about 1932 is it's before any censorship board was created. This is what they call a pre-code film.
Yeah.
So this scene in particular exemplifies the how much sexuality hangs over this film in a way that you do not see a lot of in quote unquote old movies. So
yeah, you don't expect it.
Yeah. So how do you guys? This was a topic I was going to turn later on, but it's a natural segue. So let's go with it. How do you see how do you react to the sexuality in this film? Davie, you've been quiet.
Well, I thought it was, and I wish I could come up with some examples, but I thought there was some serious innuendo a number of times that I found to be kind of surprising.
Okay, well, let's get past the fact that it's present in the film. I think we're all agreed, or for modern audiences to view a film from the 30s and see all this sexuality is unusual, because between 1933, which is when the code was instituted, and 1968, the movies became extremely prudish. So this is not, maybe 1967, let's say, but 1968 is when they instituted the current rated R, rated PG-13, all that sort of stuff. But point being that, so I understand we're surprised by it, but I mean, how do you feel sexuality was a part of the story? Like, how do you feel like it was dealt with? Like, what are some of the sexual overtones? What do you take away from the sexuality of the characters?
Well, I thought it worked. I mean, I thought it helped in the sense that.
I thought it worked.
It didn't feel gratuitous. I thought it was.
I was gonna let it go. I'm glad you said something.
All very tasteful.
I'm not asking if it's tasteful. I'm talking about, like, what do you think it's saying about sexuality in the late 20s, early 30s?
Oh, as like some sort of social commentary, or
yeah, that's what I'm driving at.
It's funny. I never thought about it. I just kind of took it as a device to build the story, and I appreciated it.
Davie Joe, what did you think of Joan Crawford's character in general?
I'm sorry. She's the
She's the Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
the secretary.
Yeah. I liked her. I liked her, but I thought that she, you know, I thought that to me the main crux of the story is the guy who's sick. The what's his name?
Lionel Barrymore.
Yes, and I thought that she really helped you kind of feel really terrible about his situation, and you know that to me was what her main force was and her main thrust, and I thought she did a great job.
Well, I mean, I do think it has some things to say as relates to the Joan Crawford character about sexuality as commerce. I think it has some things to say in terms of the sexuality as a defense mechanism in terms of the Greta Garbo character, and also like her famous line, like there's even some readings of the film that suggest that self sexuality is there was something like something related to that. So I mean, like, I feel like it's a constant present in this film, which is noteworthy in the sense that I feel like a lot of people assume that because they didn't talk about it, sex was not happening outside of marriage, before 1969. And I mean, I think people need to look back at these films and see how clearly wrong that is. I mean, like, they were probably having more sex because they weren't. There was no AIDS. There was much less in the way of STDs or anything like that. There was less fear surrounding sex. There were certainly taboos about, like, the biggest thing to be afraid of from a woman's point of view is getting, like, branded a whore. And I mean, and you see Joan Crawford go through that sort of dilemma, but only sort of because it's a depression.
Yeah, exactly. I think the depression is a really key element to this movie that isn't really ever discussed openly. But I guess getting back to Joan Crawford's character for a second, I almost saw her as, I don't want to reach too far, but in some ways, somewhat of a feminist icon. I mean, she is this young woman.
I don't think that's reaching too far at all. I don't think that's reaching too far.
She's working on her own. She clearly has autonomy over her own sexuality. She's very open about it and very willing to be about it, and she's opportunistic about it. And I think there was something about her confidence in that situation, which is surprising to see as represented in film at this point, but also was really cool to see. It was a great character to watch, to see her develop that and to see her just completely embrace sexuality in that way. I mean, her conversation with John Barrymore at the very beginning there on the railing, they're not really mincing words. They're talking about doing it quite a bit.
Right, and I mean, she's taking it seriously even though she just met this guy.
Yeah, absolutely. She is a strong, independent, and young woman who I think is supposed to be representative of a generation coming out of the Great Depression. Very.
Right. I mean, she's someone who's aware of her sexuality and uses it to her advantage. Like, I think the feminist icon thing is right on in the sense that she is, she's more modern than a lot of women, and a great contrast to Greta Garbo, who in many ways is such a wet blanket on this movie.
Yeah, well, and I think that Garbo in this movie, and maybe we'll get into this later, also represents an older generation and the end of an era. So it kind of makes sense to me that on one hand we have this one character who's in the past, and one character who's fully in the future, in terms of the female characters.
Right. There's so many directions that we can go in right now. Because we're sort of segueing all over the place. So let's go with this right now, because my other issue with the film, in terms of negatives, and obviously I've said a lot of good things as well, is a handful of what I call forced plot twist. And I don't want to give. I don't mean it's an old movie, so maybe we can give stuff away. But the very last plot twist, the audience, and I would jump on board with this, found a little disingenuous. Not related to Greta Garbo character, but certainly relates to John Barrymore, who's pictured here with Greta Garbo. That felt a little forced to me, but also their whole romantic relationship, this thief of hearts type concept, and the other thing that bothered me about John Barrymore, it's a fine performance, but his character, like, he's supposed to be a thief, but he's so freaking noble and righteous that it doesn't fit, it doesn't match. So throughout the film, there's these things that I loved, some things we've already talked about, and anytime we have these multi-cross storylines, some will be more interesting than others. I mean, I think that's part of the issue with some of these multi-storylines things, like whether it be Crash is a more recent example or something like that, is some of them are more interesting than others, which leaves the overall total feeling like, mediocre to maybe just slightly above that.
I guess just one thing about John Barrymore, he wasn't just a thief; he was a gentleman thief. So I don't necessarily have a problem with him. No, seriously, I think that is a very specific. That's a specific archetype. I mean, I think that falls into what he was doing quite well. I mean, you could draw.
I know, but I mean, like every other character in the film had very specific flaws, Greta included. You know what I mean? And his flaw was that we were told that he was a thief, but I mean, like, you didn't feel that flaw. So I mean, it's okay to be a gentleman thief, but I mean, like, I want to see. Like, is he really driven by greed, or like what is it that drives him?
I think I had a different read on his character, though. I think that we were watching him in this movie at a point in his career as a thief where it seemed like he just wasn't necessarily digging it anymore, and so he was given this opportunity to sort of get out of it in a way that he thought was compelling, and he took that. I think.
But you understand what I'm saying? There was no rough edges to this character, whereas the others all did. Like that, doesn't that seem a little odd?
No, I think there was rough edges there. I mean, I think that they showed him to be somewhat of a scoundrel, and then set him up for his redemption.
But how was he a scoundrel?
Well, he was a scoundrel because he was plotting. He was plotting how to steal, and he was sneaking into her room, and he was getting ready to rob her blind.
He was a playboy up until the end, and he was trying to actively figure out a way to steal more money throughout the entire time of his time in the hotel. Even after he had his moment, with Greta Garbo, where he changes his overall attitude.
Okay, I missed that, but was it interesting?
Well, what I was saying is that even after the point where he, sort of confesses his feelings for Greta Garbo, and he becomes a little bit more noble of a character, perhaps. You do see him trying to struggle throughout the day to figure out a way to steal money from whoever to still work out his deal with his, loan shark guy. So there is a quality then that still stays true to the idea of a thief, and also.
But I mean, like, it never comes out in his behavior. Do you see that? I mean, like, it's never I never feel like.
I don't think that he has to be, some scarred guy in a black cloak to be a thief. I mean, I think that.
I think there's immediate middle ground that you're. That I mean, like you're citing the extreme opposite example, but
because I think he was playing a very specific archetype. I don't think that there was any problem with it.
But I mean, like, do you see? But all right, then let's put it this way: all the others were not. Like, all the other characters, every other one, even like the doctor that had 3 lines. I mean, I felt like they had more dimensions to them.
Dimensions? Oh, I don't know about that. No, I don't know if I'd go that far. Honestly, they seem to all have very specific parts that they were playing through in a way that was satisfying. I mean, I think that they all had their own complexity to some degree. They all had their own misgivings about what they were doing, and they all had some sort of self-doubt, and they all had some sort of question about what they were, why they were there in the hotel, for instance. But were any of them really completely dimensionalized? I don't think any of them were completely dimensionalized. No.
Well, let's segue to just in the interest of time, and we can come back to that if we find out we have more time.
Sure.
So the audience at my screening said they all agreed about one particular performance that they really felt really good about, like amazed by.
Okay.
And some other people said a second performance. And others were like, no, I hated that second performance. So do you guys want to take a guess as to which one was which?
I'd say probably the great one is the guy with the guy with cancer or whatever illness.
Okay. J Money.
I'm gonna say the office manager guy. No, I don't know. I honestly have no idea. It could really go up for grabs for me. There's a couple different people that might fall into that category.
Well, is there a performance that felt you guys the closest to modern performance style?
The closest to modern.
All right, let's think.
No, I don't really feel like there were any performances that really reminded me of incredibly modern interpretations of these characters.
So It was Lionel Barrymore was the one that they disagreed on. Like there were some people that thought he was great, but everyone across the board felt that Joan Crawford was the most solid. Like she had moments there, like in the moment when she's first basically asked to be a prostitute.
Yeah.
Is very subtle, and like she does a lot. There's a lot of subtext going on. It's one of the quieter moments in the movie, and like you can see everything that's going through her mind, and she just says something along the lines of, "Okay," you know what I mean? Like, but the moment before the "okay" is very powerful. Like I always say that the moments in between the words are the most cinematic. So everyone felt it was like Joan Crawford, which is strange, historically speaking, because Joan Crawford's most famous roles are her scenery-chewing, campy roles, and here she is, like at the very beginning of her career, A, looking better than she's ever, than she ever looks again,
That's
and
true.
B, giving one of the more solid performances. Now, as far as Lionel Barrymore, who's also pictured here, I'm with Davie Joe, and I think he's big, he's large, he's over the top, but in just the right way.
Absolutely.
Whereas, Greta Garbo is over the top in a very forced way, and in a way that also I think she's two-dimensional. On the flip side of him, but on the flip side of John Barrymore, they're both two-dimensional, but one's too righteous and one is just too boring.
I would agree with your assessment here. I think that Joan Crawford's performance, as much as I like the character in general, was not what I would consider like a modern or naturalistic performance in any way.
Well, I mean, wouldn't you say it was the closest, though, comparatively speaking, within the context of the film?
Honestly, for me, the closest is Greta Garbo. I think that she felt the most realistically disturbed in a way to me, because I think that there was somebody I could see, sort of this post-ingenue, this prima donna lady who was so wrapped up in her own self-absorption that she couldn't see past what was, the thing that was driving her, which was John Barrymore at that point. But, Joan Crawford to me, well, let me back up. They all represent something in their performances to me. None of them really seemed like they were necessarily natural or realistic. So it's hard for me to say, one kind of beat the other in that situation. Lionel Barrymore, I liked his character by the end of the movie, but I found him really grating to begin with, because it certainly seemed like he was doing a shtick. There was a lot of shtick involved with this stuff, so.
Yeah, early on.
But that's the kind of performance though, where it's like the shtick hits all the right notes. Like it's a rare thing. It's a tough tightrope to watch. To navigate. I mean.
Well, what I would say is that the shtick pays off in the end, but you have to suffer through a little bit to get there. Like I really did feel like it was hard to kind of stomach some of his earlier stuff in the film. But by the end of it, then you see where it goes, you see how it pays off, and it makes it all worthwhile.
Davie Joe, the buzzer just went off, but do you want to opine about that performances thing?
Lionel Barrymore's first scene is he's complaining about his room, and when I first saw that, I was a little worried about whether I was going to be able to even take him. By the time it was over, I was totally enthralled with the performance, and I don't know. He sold it to where I definitely felt for him by the end of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, but I think that speaks to the strength of his performance too, like the way he grows on you. I mean, because he's consistent. Yeah. You know what I mean? He's consistent in his performance choices, and I think the fact that he grows on you actually makes the performance in the beginning even better.
I don't think we can ignore the fact that him and John Barrymore are brothers as well, and there was some of that camaraderie that really comes through in a way that's very sweet and very actually realistic in their performances.
Right, and the fun part about this too is most people know Lionel Barrymore, as sweet and funny as in this movie. Most people know him as the penny pincher from It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah,
so
it's crazy. It's crazy to think of him in that role. That's amazing to me. But yeah.
So the time is up for the actual Grand Hotel discussion. We got the brackets coming up, but before we do that, we talked about the set ever so briefly, and we don't have time to talk about it, but I did want to share this overhead photo of the set. This was built on a stage in this way. So I mean, I don't know if you guys can see this photo or the detail of this photo, but But if there was any doubt about the amazingness of the set,
It's
I
crazy.
think it puts it to rest right there. And as a graphic designer, as a person with design history, J Money, I think you would especially appreciate that.
Absolutely, and I could also see why this movie influenced a lot of filmmakers post that. I mean, there's certainly an Altman-esque, quality to this film in general. But I mean, obviously, you can't ignore Wes Anderson, since Wes Anderson made a movie that was basically based on this just a few years ago or a year ago.
Just last year, just
Yeah,
2014.
last year. So there you go. I mean,
There's no question the Grand Budapest Hotel is tied to this.
even just in the title itself, it's clearly referencing and homaging this in some ways. So.
Yeah, no, for sure. And also, there's a Broadway musical based on this as well that came out 89 or 90. It did win the Tony for Best Musical. Tommy Tune put it on. So
Tommy Tune, nice.
It's had some life. It's had some life beyond that. All right, so it's time, gentlemen, for us to do some bracketology, as it were. Are you guys excited?
Oh, yeah. Pumped.
Pumped. All right, so let me bring up the proper. Is this the right thing? Yes, it is. It's Class of Movie Showdown. Boom!
Congratulations, CB.
Well, I was excited because I finally got the right graphic up. It takes longer. All right, Davie Joe always reads the rules, so why don't we get J Money? Why don't you read the rules this time?
I can't.
Okay, Davie, take it away.
All right. Let's see. Seating criteria varies from bracket to bracket.
Don't just read it. Own it.
All right. Well, you got to put it back on the screen.
It is on the screen.
Oh, yeah, I can see it. I'll do it. Okay. Films at JB hosted screenings need to be 15 years or older. In parentheses 2000. Voters are eligible if they see both films within a 12-month period. Voters must see both films in JB's presence, and JB is ineligible to vote, but he does break ties and skulls.
Davie, do you see what I mean about owning it now?
And hearts. Don't forget hearts.
See how we did that?
And hearts, that's right. JB also breaks hearts. And mine. Hearts and minds. Yeah.
It's truer than you might think. All right, so those are the rules. All right, so the best this time we are doing, and I'm vamping so I can pull up the proper bracket. But last time we did the best picture loser bracket, which meaning films that were nominated for best picture and lost. Yeah. In this case, we are doing the best picture bracket. I think this is right. So let's see. Is this the right thing? It is! So these are Best Picture winners in the bracket, top 64. Grand Hotel is a 15 seed, so those of you that follow basketball know that's towards the bottom. And also know that in a first-round matchup, that would go up against a number 2 seed, which in this case is All About Eve. Now, both of these boys have watched All About Eve in the past 2 weeks in preparation for tonight.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Not 2 weeks.
You watched it 3 weeks ago because I gave you advance notice.
That's right. That's exactly how it is. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So, and in watching it in the past few weeks, was it your first times, gentlemen?
Yes.
Yes. In the context of me watching in the last few weeks, it was my first time. You're correct.
You were not on camera for that close quote thing. But,
and you know what I did.
Davie Joe, what did you think watching about it for the first time?
I liked it a lot. I thought the dialogue was a lot of fun, and it was kind of a story that I feel like I've seen in some other movies.
But since then, you've seen other movies since then.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. This certainly they're a derivative of this, and not vice versa. But it's kind of a classic theme, and I liked the movie a lot.
J Money?
I have Betty Davis eyes. It's a great performance. It's a great movie.
I mean, every performance in All About Eve is pretty outstanding.
That's true. Anne Baxter's also great.
Well, I mean, also it is the #1 overall seed in our Best Supporting Actor bracket. George Sanders' performance.
That's true. Fair enough.
Is quite possibly the greatest supporting performance of all time. So, back to the brackets, gentlemen. So with this in mind, first of all, Davie Joe, is a 2 seed too high for you for All About Eve, or you think it should be lower?
I mean, it's hard for me to. I think it is because, well, I mean, you want me to spoil what I'm going to say? I mean, yeah.
If you want to vote, you can vote.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Grand Hotel. So yeah, I guess 2 is high, but I mean, it's there for a reason. There's a historical context and the way it's been thought of throughout history. I can't really complain about the seating.
Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, and you understand too that I mean, like in terms of legacy, All About Eve's reach has been longer historically speaking.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's kind of what I was getting at, in that I think that a lot of movies have kind of used it.
Grand Hotel was influential too, but I mean also, a lot more modern audiences, like literally people had trouble watching Grand Hotel. Like the sound quality is one thing, performance style, whereas All About Eve is a lot closer to our modern sensibilities.
Yeah,
that's part of it too in terms of the seating. But All About Eve tends to hold up, and that's part of the seating thing. Why did you choose Grand Hotel exactly?
I'll tell you what. Grand Hotel is a movie that's going to stick with me because there's a scene, a shot, really, just a quick shot toward the end of the movie that I thought was absolutely heart-wrenching. Really kind of touched me. It was when the guy's sweeping the hotel and they're walking the dog out.
Yeah.
I was like, damn! Oh my God, that hurt. I mean, that hurt my heart. Like
Now, and one of the classics that we've talked about it was Last Picture Show, like a couple months ago. I mean, it had a similar moment. Do you remember?
You mean I remember not watching Last Picture Show. So.
All right, J Money, what do you think?
What do I think?
Grand Hotel.
I'm going to go All About Eve on this, even though I really did enjoy Grand Hotel quite a bit.
Was it close, or is it just All About Eve just too dominant for you?
It's sort of like Grand Hotel. I really appreciated seeing how it was the basis for a lot of more modern film that I know now. But between the two movies, in terms of what I would watch again, I probably would gravitate towards just All About Eve because I really appreciate the movie in general. I just think that the storyline is a little more compelling. I think that maybe it is because it's a little bit more modern. I can associate it with it a little bit better. I really like the performances in it. So overall, it's just going to win out for me. I don't want to negate, how much I appreciate and how much I did ultimately end up liking Grand Hotel. It's just that at the end of the day, what I'm more comfortable with is probably All About Eve. And
in fairness, the voters, as you saw from the rules, were present in the screening, and it was a unanimous vote. And as it happens, All About Eve is just too much of a behemoth, for Grand Hotel. I mean, I think people feel more similarly, I think how J Money did in terms of Grand Hotel being, engaging. Like people were interested in it. Like it was not a waste of time. People are glad that they saw it.
Absolutely.
Very possible, worthy of its Oscar for Best Picture. However, and in terms of 30s Best Picture winners, quite frankly, it is one of the few to still get watched and talked about. I mean, you don't hear people talk about Cimarron as much. Even All Quiet on the Western Front, which we talked about, you don't see screened that much.
Sure.
Nobody's heard of Cavalcade, The Great Ziegfeld, The Life of Emile Zola. I mean, like these are films that don't get talked about as much. Maybe It Happened One Night is a 30s film, and of course Gone with the Wind are the two main 30s Best Picture winners. But Grand Hotel's right up there.
Sure.
For what it's worth. Yeah. But the group chose All About Eve. I'm sorry, Davie. But I am surprised. I'm interested and happy to get a dissenting vote because I didn't expect that.
Yeah, I didn't either.
Do you judge him?
No, it's good that Davie's asserting for himself on occasion. He's got to think independently once in a while. It's good. It's good.
Okay, so I've got a surprise for you guys. Well, I guess it's not a surprise for you. It's going to be a surprise for our audience, though. We've got a bonus bracket here, and it's a leftover from last week, and it seemed to make more sense to do it tonight as a part of this instead of as a part of the sound off, the freeform segment, because this is the classic movie showdown segment. So this is what happened last week. We talked about Apocalypse Now, and I hope I get this graphic right. We did. So we talked about Apocalypse Now on our last broadcast, and this was one of the battles, the showdown in the 70s bracket, an 8-9 matchup, which is the closest you can get in a first round. Davie Joe, who's a basketball expert, knows that better than anybody. So this was the matchup, and we talked, and you can go back to watch our episode 18.3. If you search on YouTube for No Name Cinema Society episode 18.3, you'll find our Apocalypse Now discussion, and you can see what J Money and Davie had to say about this particular matchup specifically. So we won't rehash that, but what I will rehash is the winner, which was Chinatown. In a close vote, as I recall. So Chinatown moved on. Now, when Chinatown moved on, after the broadcast, I realized that it set up a second-round matchup that we could settle right here and there. Because a couple of years ago, we had screenings in New York for these two films, also in the 70s bracket. And it was a number 1, Annie Hall, versus number 16, The Way We Were. And, of course, number 1 seeds always go against number 16 seeds in the first round. And so just by way of recap, I'm doing a lot of talking here, guys. By way of recap,
I don't get this.
Is this the right? This is the right. By way of recap,
oh, here we are again. You know, Davie Joe.
Yeah.
I don't get sports.
I thought I was going to.
Nope.
Have you guys seen The Way We Were?
Oh, he's back. He's back.
He's back. Oh, yeah, he's back. I have not seen The Way We Were.
I haven't either.
Seen it at this point? Maybe I should have.
I mean, why wouldn't you? To avoid Barbara?
You know, I cannot argue with that point. So.
I mean, it's an iconic film of the 70s, and I was surprised at how receptive the audiences were when we screened it in New York. But point being that Annie Hall moved on to the second round, Chinatown moved on to the second round, and they're in the same quadrant. And again, you will understand this better if you understand how the brackets work in NCAA basketball.
No idea.
So what that sets up is, those of you who know that the best possible second round matchup for a 1 seed is an 8 seed, and so that's what happened. This was the showdown. Now, since through this group within the last 12 months, these gentlemen have been forced to watch both Annie Hall and Chinatown, and they were both screened in the last 12 months as well. Chinatown was at Bryant Park in New York. So these gentlemen are eligible to vote and determine this second round matchup right here, right now, for you, our audience. So Davie is the one who I don't think I know what he's going to say. So let's start with him.
I'm going to say Annie Hall.
Okay, and you're going to say that why?
Annie Hall, I believe I've said this about this movie before, but it's a movie that's kind of changed me. I mean, I feel like a lot of the things that I talk about, the way I talk, just the way I work lines in from Annie Hall into everyday conversations. So the
way he talks, ladies and gentlemen.
So it's definitely just been a bigger force in my life, and I don't know that that's necessarily the way we ought to vote for these things, but that's how I did it.
Oh, my question to you is, do you need the eggs?
Right. I like it. Yes, need the eggs. Very good.
So yeah, and I mean, no harm in that. I mean, obviously, Annie Hall is a number 1 seed. So I mean, in the 70s, it's certainly a dominant force. It's the film that beat Star Wars for Best Picture. So it is certainly no shame in that. J Money, I think you're going to disagree.
Well, first off, I want to say that I've always described Davie Joe as sort of Woody Allen-esque in a lot of ways. Whenever I describe him to people that don't know him, I always say, picture Woody Allen in Annie Hall. That's Davie Joe. And I think it holds true even to this day. Listen, I like Annie Hall. I like it plenty. I like Chinatown more. So Chinatown is definitely going to be my pick in this situation. I don't know if it's because I have a lot of latent aggression towards my parents and towards our parents of our generation that grew up with Annie Hall and that define themselves by Annie Hall to some degree. But ultimately, at the end of the day,
did your mom wear a tie?
You know what? In a lot of ways, yes. She aspired to be Annie Hall as a character, and I see it now more than I did even when I was a kid. But it's in a lot of ways, this movie touches on certain elements of how I view my parents from that generation in a way that maybe is influencing my direction. I don't know. I don't want to say that because that's not necessarily fair.
This is getting really interesting, guys.
Well, there's a lot of baggage here, one way or the other. At the end of the day, I'm not a racist, so Chinatown it is.
What does race have to do with anything?
I support Asian Americans. Chinatown.
Oh, I see.
Unlike Davie Joe.
Does that make Davie Joe a racist? Did I just hear that right?
Yes, it does. He.
Oh
so
my
Davie
God.
Joe, that creates a tie. So what do the rules suggest happen then?
That would suggest, based on what I read earlier.
Davie Joe, what happens in a tie?
Then you got to break some hearts.
I am breaking hearts and ties. I'm going to break somebody's heart here. Now, the tough part about this matchup is both of these films are my top 10 all time. Amazing that they go against each other this early in the bracket, but that's the way the 70s go. Annie Hall was a Best Picture winner. Chinatown was a Best Picture loser, very well regarded. But in the way the seeding goes, it just fell here. It's definitely one of the toughest calls I would ever have to make. But since I've already pre-ranked them on my top 10 list and have announced that publicly, Annie Hall is my 7th favorite film of all time. Chinatown is my 2nd favorite film of all time. So just by virtue of that, as the timer goes off appropriately, how about that? Chinatown is the winner. So Chinatown moves on to the 3rd round, and this is notable, everyone, because this is the only in all of the brackets, and we've got 20 brackets at this point of all different shapes and sizes. They're all the same size, but all different kinds of brackets, by decade, by Best Picture winners. You've seen them all on this show. It's only the 2nd time a number 1 seed has been eliminated. The only other time is in the list of Why are you shaking your head?
No, that's great.
Oh.
We're making history. We are making history here, gentlemen, tonight.
Yeah, so the only other time, for your information, tidbits, is in the bracket of Best Picture, Best Films not nominated for Best Picture. Best American Films not nominated for Best Picture. It's its own bracket, a very popular bracket, I might add. And the number 1 seed was The Searchers.
Yeah.
And it fell to the number 16 seed, The Shining.
What?
Yeah, I'm going to have to say what to that one also. What the fuck? Come on.
Wow, we dropped an F-bomb here! Things are getting real riled up. So yeah, well, I mean, shocking. It was a shocking development at the time as well. But The Shining beat The Searchers and moved on in that bracket. Shining's a good film.
It is. It is.
Yeah, but come on. All right, whatever.
No, I mean, I'm with you guys. But that's I was not a voter on that one. So anyway. That's the little tidbits. Searchers and Annie Hall, the first 2 number 1 seeds to go bye-bye. Strangely, tons and tons of number 2 seeds have gone bye-bye. That's a whole other separate discussion. We've got to move on. We have 6 minutes to get to our sound-off. For those of you who don't know, the sound-off is going to is this free-form segment where basically Davie talks for a little while, but the best part is I'm going to reveal my top 5 Bond films of all time, also on the sound-off free-form segment, coming up very shortly. And I can also tell you that the next classic, what do I have for you? Here's my little trivia tidbit for the next classic that we're going to do on November 23rd. The most famous director of all time only directed 1 performance to an Oscar, and it is the performance. It is the film that features that performance that we'll be seeing, and discussing in the next broadcast. Okay, we're done. We'll see you guys in 6 minutes for the No Name Cinema Society sound off. Too many S sounds. We're out. We'll see you in a few minutes.